Hello there, welcome back to training. Tim Warner here with a mini lesson called Structured LLM Prompting with XML. Now, if you're a developer, you're thinking, Tim, why are you bringing up XML? We're in a JSON world. If you're not a developer, you might be thinking, what is XML and why should I care? Well, let's get into it. If you've been working with large language models to any degree or another, you know that it's all about your prompt. The quality of your prompt directly impacts more than anything else the quality of the response coming back from the AI. And I have to admit that I'm as guilty as anybody at presenting the LLMs with a wall of text prompt. I just will dump my brain in terms of what I need, and I can be pretty sharp with my language in terms of crystallizing what I want, but it gives the LLM a lot to have to parse through. And if you just give them a big old block prompt, the LLM has no hierarchy or structure to go on. That's the basic idea here, okay? So therefore, the solution is to structure your prompts. And the focus of this lesson is using a particular data markup language in order to convey what are called semantics. In other words, meaning. As you can see on the right side of this slide, instead of saying you are a data analyst, we're wrapping it in what look like HTML tags. We've got context, task, and format. And the purpose of those, as awkward as it might seem at first to wrap your prompt around it, is that it gives the AI a lot more to go on and will short path you to success. That's what I've found. Now, there are other contenders in terms of how to mark up your prompts. Markdown is a very common one. Markdown is a way to mark up plain text and give it semantics. With this, the double pound signs is a level 2 heading, so therefore you've got hierarchy. You can do ordered lists and unordered lists to convey hierarchy. It's human readable, it's familiar, it's used ubiquitously, but the problem is that the nesting is ambiguous and there's no attribute support. With JSON, this is the current data serialization format in development nowadays. It's eminently parsable by any AI, but it gets verbose and messy with prose, and then if you're escaping lines, it can easily hang up in terms of use. It just is kind of kludgy. Now, you might laugh when I mentioned that XML is a preferred format for structured prompts, because if you've been in development, you know that XML is largely, it's if not gone the way of the dodo, it's certainly de-emphasized. As a way to mark up data for meaning, I mean, it's there. There's clear boundaries. You can do schema enforcement, but it's just not what we're using nowadays. So it's interesting that it comes back as a proven practice with LLM prompts. What I really love about XML for structured prompting is not only the easy nesting, but also attributes. As you can see, we've got task. We might invoke the task tab several times, but we can add our own attributes to further subdivide them. Now, if you're thinking that we're going to use XML for every conversational turn, of course not. I'm promoting putting some time and effort into structuring your opening salvo prompt. When you're starting a project, whatever it is, your first prompt, your one shot, is going to be the most important, and it would be that one that would be the candidate for markup. I'll use Markdown in a pinch because it's fast. I would only use XML in an opening salvo prompt that I've really put some thought into. If you're going to do a deep research job that's very compute intensive and you only get a certain number of credits per month, you don't want to waste your shots. So that's why I'm suggesting this more methodical approach. Now, I say that valid XML only matters if your downstream parser requires it. This isn't a case where you're actually looking at the document object model of a web page and you're looking at XML schemas. Not at all. What I should say here is that we're using XML-like tagging, okay? In terms of head-to-head Markdown versus XML, again, you can see some ambiguity here if you're doing multiple headings at the same level. You're not telling the LLM anything about priority. And as the problem statement says, where does context end? Is agreement part of the instructions or not? It can get really messy. But if you're using XML-style tags, particularly you've got your opening and closing tags, you're being very unambiguous about the start and end of each boundary. You see, that's the basic idea. And this is actually sourced in the vendor's literature. Anthropic, OpenAI, Google all discuss XML as a way to make your prompts more effective. Here we have on this slide some examples of using XML-style markup with nesting and attributes, as you can see in these first two examples. And then put brief rationale and rationale tags and final answer and answer tags. So here, we're actually doing plain text and instructing in our prompt what tags mean what. And when you're using a standard in terms of your prompt templates or your opening salvo prompts, that makes your prompts much more rich for regular expression-based extraction if you wanted to do that. If you developed a prompt library and you wanted to gather all prompts that use a particular tag or a particular markup, it's useful when you've got a standard down. All right. Don't want to get too far into the slides here. I wanted to include a little tutorial here on how you can actually implement XML-based markup in an easy way. Remember, we're not concerned about validation or legal XML. You're just co-opting the actual markup, opening and closing tags, attributes, nesting, and you're applying that to your prompt. Now, another discussion actually that we could discuss in another YouTube video is how to choose what those elements should be in a prompt. That role would be good one, rationale, output, and task, priority. Ones in these slides are a good start, but that's actually something that requires quite a bit of thought as well. And like I mentioned, XML is understandable by all the AIs. And I've sourced in the docs, Anthropic docs, OpenAI docs, Google docs at the least, that they've all demonstrated that XML performs well with their models. So by using XML with Markdown, I would suppose, as a standard for your structured opening prompts, you're really able to cover all the bases in terms of cross-provider, cross-vendor. All right, so what are our key takeaways? I'm not going to read this bullet list to you. You can read and study the slide on your own. What I want to close with is a brief demo on how we can automate building XML-based prompts. And I'm going to do that in Claude Code using Skills. To my knowledge, Anthropic and their SaaS product Claude is the only vendor that's doing Skills. I know that the other vendors are trying to implement it because it's a great idea. What Skills are, they're sort of like portable projects if you've used projects with LLMs. And I'm using a technique I call pillar jumping here, where I'm asking the AI to use itself to build a prompt, if that makes sense. In other words, I was chatting with Claude, and I asked it about this whole subject of using XML and so on. And then I thought, well, why don't you go ahead and create me a skill that I can install that I can just feed a prompt in, and then you mark it up with XML. And then in so doing, as you can see here, it gave me some artifacts that I can download. But then I realized, this is meta, that Anthropic actually has a built-in skill specifically for building skills. So I asked Claude, did you use the skill builder skill when you made my LLM XML markup skill? And it didn't. So I then went on and said, I need you to use the skill builder skill. And that's a good tip. Whenever you make a skill with Claude Desktop or Claude Code, make sure that you explicitly instruct Claude to use the built-in skill builder skill. And I have it create an XML Prompt Wizard skill, and I asked it for a zip download to show you, my learners, and also to discuss it in Claude and so on, uninstall the previous version. You can get to your skills by going into your Claude settings, all right? So it went through and created the artifact. I installed it, and that means I can say in a new conversation, or I can continue here, use my new XML Wizard skill to format this prompt. And then now I would Control V my brain dump. Let's say I'm working on a new course on Circle CI. I could say, I need an instructional plan for a 60-minute video training course on Circle CI development for the IT ops professional. Go on from there. Now, I'm going to be using Opus, which is the most robust model that Claude subscriptions offer. And I've also got thinking mode turned on. I like to do that double-barreled assault when I really want to have the AI lean into whatever task I'm doing. And on the front end of a project, what I call my opening salvo prompt, that is really, really important. So the idea is that I'm going to take the output that Claude gives me and then feed it into, it could be another skill that's great at building course outlines, or I could be feeding it into another LLM. You see, it really doesn't matter. I'm just using Claude here as a tool where whenever I need that result, I can just dump the prompt in. It gives me the XML formatted prompt, and then away I go. You see the idea? Let's finish by taking a look at a Claude skill. Skill, as I said, is sort of like a portable project because it's available in Claude Desktop or Claude Code as long as you've got the same account. And they're portable because you can modify them in the file system. They exist on my Claude Desktop installation on my Windows workstation. And as you see, Skill is basically a zip archive. It consists of a file with all uppercase skill.md. That's the manifest. It's the overall description of what the skill does. And you can refactor this, and you should refactor this over time. As you can see, it goes through what it's thinking about as it adds those XML-style elements. But beyond the skill MD, there's also assets. There's a prompt template. Now, the specific assets in your skill are up to you. This is just an example of my XML Prompt Wizard skill. And references is very much like a RAG source in a project. I've got examples and provider notes. And what's so beautiful about Claude Skills in the Anthropic world is that it bundles more than just a system prompt. It bundles automation code. As you can see, we've got a couple Python scripts, one that will take your input and run an analysis on it. And then two, once you've got it marked up, this Python will run to validate it, to make sure that all of your tags are properly closed, making sure that it's implemented your specified tag vocabulary. If it nests what Claude thinks is too far, it'll warn you on that. Basically, it's a linting script. Really cool stuff. Anthropic's got it all going on. I'm telling you, between skills and subagents, it is fantastic. My two go-to LLM subscriptions are ChatGPT Pro and Claude Max, worth every penny. And I have CLI support on both of those. So for development, I've got Claude Code. And then on the OpenAI ChatGPT side, I've got Codex and the Codex CLI. They are all aces as far as I'm concerned. I hope that you found this lesson helpful. Let me know in the comments if there are any lessons that I haven't covered yet that you'd like me to. I'm here for you. Thanks again. Catch you later.